you.
Welcome.
How are you? Very, very good.
As PM, he'd been accused of publicising trips or calls to Ukraine to distract from woes at home. The irony might not be lost then on Boris Johnson today that his first trip since resigning coincides with yet more allegations of dubious dealings. This time with the BBC chairman Richard Sharp, reported to have helped him secure a guarantor for an £800,000 loan during his premiership, weeks before Mr Johnson tipped him for the top job. That an aspiring chairman of the BBC would be involved in discussions around the personal finances of a Prime Minister who could recommend him for the job poses serious questions. Questions raised by the Cabinet Office itself. According to the Sunday Times, its propriety and ethics team actually wrote to Boris Johnson telling him to stop seeking Richard Sharp's advice. But by then it was too late. The former PM had put his name forward.
It all seems just very murky at the moment of quite what the role was. I mean, a lot of it basically just seems to go back to the fact that we had a Prime Minister who just spent an awful lot of time trying to think about how he'd get people to manage him out of whatever financial holes he'd dug himself. And that's actually the source of many of these problems.
The Cabinet Office told us Mr Sharp had been appointed following a rigorous appointments process, followed, they say, by an additional pre-appointment scrutiny from a House of Commons Select Committee. The Sunday Times reports neither the panel or the Select Committee were informed by Mr Sharp of the loan. Mr Sharp said he didn't provide financial advice and that there was no conflict of interest, while Mr Johnson said he declared his interest properly, though Mr Sharp's involvement wasn't declared on his register of interests. Labour are now calling for a probe into the appointment system.
This government will have integrity, professionalism and accountability at every level.
The Prime Minister's Downing Street pledge is today weathering headlines about residents past, not just of number 10, but number 11 too. Former Chancellor Nadhim Zahawi is under fire over a tax settlement with HMRC, with allegations of a penalty too. It's a settlement that relates to shares in an offshore company, and one he hasn't ruled out being reached during his time as Chancellor.
Why didn't Zahawi get tax advice when he received 27 million quid? Because if he had, I'm sure it would have told him there's tax on that. And if he had got tax advice and his advisor had merely gotten it wrong, well, that happens sometimes, but you don't then pay 30% penalties.
Mr Zahawi said HMRC deemed errors in his tax affairs careless and not deliberate. He's yet to confirm how much he's reported to have been charged, and calls for more transparency have been emanating from within his own party.
Get it all out now, whatever you have to do, and clear it up. I genuinely don't believe this is a man who's deceitful in any shape or form, but this goes on and the media waits, so I think I would just clear it up.
A foot soldier, a spear carrier, I will do whatever I can.
Boris Johnson had been warned his trip to Ukraine this weekend could undermine Rishi Sunak, but the PM's spokesperson said he backed all colleagues showing the UK's support. Earlier, the Foreign Secretary spoke of his disappointment at Germany's reticence to allow tanks into the country.
I would like nothing more than to see the Ukrainians equipped with those most up-to-date armoured vehicles, both tanks and artillery and others. The Leopard 2 is an incredibly effective piece of military equipment.
Each day of delay, said one of President Zelensky's advisers, is killing more of our people.
Well, earlier I spoke to Conservative grandee and former Deputy Prime Minister Lord Heseltine, and I asked him first what he made of the day's revelations.
Well, I'm much more interested in the overall strategic position of the government. And quite frankly, I remember also, well, these incidental and often headline-making issues, they always come up for all governments and they go away. And they don't actually have an effect upon the way people vote in a general election. People are interested in how the economy is working for them, how they see the national interest being pursued. And they make judgments on those sort of much more significant and long-term issues. So I'm afraid governments have to learn to live with the day-to-day crises, which are wonderful for the headline makers, but not a great deal contribution to British history.
But it appears on the face of it, Labour are calling for an investigation into whether Boris Johnson, who may not be Prime Minister anymore, but he is still an MP, whether he broke the MP's code of conduct. That matters to voters, doesn't it, as well as his colleagues in the House of Commons?
Well, that's what the Labour opposition is bound to do. What else can you do as an opposition but call for an inquiry? I mean, the Labour Party calls for an inquiry 24/7, and I don't criticise them. I did it myself when I was in opposition.
Doesn't it reflect a pattern of behaviour by the former Prime Minister, though, that is threatening to drag your former party into the mire?
Well, I think that Boris's behaviour has been well documented, and I'm not going to predict which direction it drags the party, but I don't think there's anything new is going to emerge that comes as any surprise. And I actually believe the British people have moved on. They want to know how Rishi Sunak is going to deliver as a Prime Minister. And I happen to believe that he has made a remarkable contribution to the well-being of the British people. If you remember what he did to protect jobs and to lower bills in that most devastating of crises called COVID.
The problem is, though, that the more Rishi Sunak tries to relaunch his government based around integrity, as he promised on the doorsteps of Number 10, the more these allegations, a succession of allegations, rear their heads and sort of undermine what he's trying to do, don't they?
Yes, I think that is fair. But again, you've got to put it in perspective. We're not fighting a general election campaign, and that is some way off. So when we get to the election, the people, in my view, will judge whether he's achieved the things he set out to do, and perhaps whether he's achieved the things they wanted him to do that he may not have prioritised.
I mean, is it distracting Rishi Sunak, do you think, from focusing on what he does want to achieve as Prime Minister?
Yes, that's undoubtedly the case. Every Prime Minister watches the news coverage on an hourly basis in some cases. And so anything that grabs a headline is a distraction. But I think what we've learned about the present Prime Minister is that he's devoted to hard work. And one of the things that I like about what I see is that he's not a constant seeker after headlines. He's not a constant photo opportunity. He's burrowing away with the details and the facts to try and come up with relevant, longer-term solutions. And I think that's to be admired and will stand to his credit.
The problem is he keeps getting dragged back into the headlines for all the wrong reasons. So, you know, his party chairman, Nadhim Zahawi, is allegedly, he was discussing an unpaid tax bill while he was Chancellor. You know, he is in the current Prime Minister's cabinet. It doesn't sound like a government of integrity there, as Rishi Sunak promised.
Well, I'm in no position to make comments about the veracity of the story one way or the other, and I wouldn't dream of doing so. But I keep repeating to you that the Prime Minister's real accountability is some many months off yet.
Lord Heseltine, thanks very much.
Thank you.